Quine gives us not only naturalized epistemology, which is important because we need a meme for meme meaning literal, like, program, heuristic program. We need a heuristic program for the observer.
And Quine offers the following image to think of our language and our culture. Total science, or the sum of our knowledge, Quine likens to a field of force. The boundary conditions of this field of force are experience. Anomalous experiences at the periphery, the boundary conditions, induced readjustments of the sentences in the field's interior. And the total field is sufficiently underdetermined by the periphery such that any recalcitrant experience leaves much choice as to which sentences or beliefs to reevaluate. And an example that Quine draws on is even logical truths are subject to revision. He notes that there was a point in the history of science, in the wave-particle struggle over light, interpretation of light, where some scientists said, look, you know what we really have to do? Let's just jettison the law of excluded middle, P or not P. That you have to have one or the other. And Quine says, well, it actually worked out. Quantum mechanics sort of saved us from having to do that, but if it hadn't, that would have been a logical thing to do. That would have made perfect sense. Every belief in that field of force, no matter how far we push it into the center, can be rewoven, and there's more than one choice as to what to reweave.
Energy, well, I'll just throw this in there. Energy is also information, it turns out. And we'll move forward from there.
No sentence is immune to revision. And while the periphery of our field must be kept squared with experience, the chief considerations governing the arrangement of the interior are conservation of belief and simplicity, especially of laws. And we'll come to see that these are not, quote, foundational epistemological principles, but rather they're evolutionary. We have a limited amount of storage space in our disks, as it were. Conservation of belief means that as we reweave our beliefs, as we change our sentences, it's easier to detect where we made mistakes. Similarly with simplicities, the less moving parts we have in a theoretical explanation, the easier it is when we screw up to figure out where it is we screwed up, where it is we made our mistake. Quine, by destroying the analytic synthetic distinction, demands a more thoroughgoing pragmatism.
So let's talk about that. The free energy principle, there are a couple of things like it, but I've arbitrarily chosen this one. The free energy principle, Kant, rational agents. Free energy principle is just a more modern version of rational Kant agency. But the free energy principle suggests that biological agents minimize surprise by predicting their sensory inputs. Like, they have this thing called surprise, and they have inputs. And what they're trying to do is align their surprise with what is happening as input, implying differential equation, implying t equaling more than 0, because we're not just figuring out what the one situation is, it's a morphological process.
Ontological relativity and other essays. Quine's thesis is that when we specify the entities in some theory or language, we'll call that the object language. We do so by translating sentences with those entities into another background language or theory, which we'll call the meta-language, which is richer and more
intensive character thermodynamic process. So the information is crystal. Well, morphology is kind of that. Damn it, dude, I hate crystals. I just fucking realized that, dude. I mean, I don't hate them, but, you know, I hate how zeitgeist, you know, for fuck's sake. Damn, that does, morphology does imply some fucking crystallography, doesn't it? Well, so does holography. Fuck, I am just talking about some crystal bullshit. Fuck. Damn it. Shit. So, free energy principle is about lining up the inputs to the internal intensive thermodynamic state that observers are not privy to. Doesn't matter. It's a black box. There's a black box state when t equals 0. When t equals 0, like I said, you have to have a differential equation in order to really do anything. But when t equals 0, the thermodynamic character is intensive and, for all intents and purpose, crystal. I mean, it is what it is. It is a state logic duality. It is both the source code and the data at this point in terms of thermodynamism and or quantum informatics, or whatever the fuck you want to call it, relativity. Special relativity, I guess. I don't fucking know, dude.
History of science and the wave-particle struggle over light, interpretation of light, where some scientists said, look, you know what we really have to do? Let's just jettison the law of excluded middle, P or not P. That you have to have one or the other. And Quine says, well, it actually worked out. Quantum mechanics sort of saved us from having to do that, but if it hadn't, that would have been a logical thing to do. That would have made perfect sense. Every belief in that field of force, no matter how far we push it into the center, can be rewoven, and there's more than one choice as to what to reweave. So our logical laws, then, even the formal laws that Quine did so much to postulate and to clarify, are simply sentences we place at the center of the field. And they are behavioralistically those we are least likely, or even, in fact, desirous to change. So unless we're absolutely forced to, we will keep the law of excluded middle, but it is not beyond the possibility that we'll drop it.
So, what is special about humans and this matching that's going on? Well, with humans, and I posit indeed anybody or anything capable of speech, and or, well, I mean, really singing, whatever the fuck, I mean, culture, whatever, like, I guess it doesn't really matter what the bare minimum is, but there are things, including speaking, working, writing, thinking, that collapse the wave function, which gives rise to unbelievable complexity, because when we're looking at our input here, rather than just being looking at input, we're looking at input with the potential of also being entangled with the rest of the world. Literally, you could have an infinite entangled chain from here. So, like, I mean, we don't know what it is, but it is. We don't know that if this. We know that there's the possibility of there's 50-50 chance, but there isn't, because we've got the uncertainty and we've got entanglement, we've got these other things. So there's 44.5, and you get the statistical outliers, integrating, having the ability to be, I say bugs, bacteria, epigenetics, this is viruses, this is elephants, everything is this, but sufficiently conscious this has the ability for this quantity to be entangled. And it's thermodynamically intensive to this part of the calculation. Even though we don't know what this is, this could be an infinite, for all we know, thermodynamic process triggered by an entanglement of a single effing thing. Doesn't matter. Infinite Markov chain. Doesn't matter. We don't know what it is. It's in here. Doesn't matter. It's in here. So this is an incredibly heady part of what this all implies, but someone's got to tell you this, so I guess it's gonna have to be me. So there has to be there has to be an informational bit to the universe. There literally has to be. I'm not talking about Planck lengths. I'm talking about information. I'm talking about the thing that gave rise to the ability for us to create language. Language is a programming language. Context. It brings to mind a complete ontology. There is a complete ontology to the informational bit. We might be getting into a Jungian territory. The idea of a collective unconscious might have been that might have been the thing that we had to have in order to go on to create language, because this collective unconscious is this thing that's full of images and allegories, and it's this thing that we used over hundreds of thousands of years to encode actual thermodynamic, intensive character and properties of the inner space or outer space, I guess, if you want to think of it that way, into not just sound waves, obviously sound waves, but the thing is, information is anything. It's not just talking, and so it's not just humans and stuff. But this is why speaking, thinking, and writing collapses the wave function. Because we spent 100,000 years of Jungian, Platonic cave wall watching, which is that's just like, that's the good metaphor for a passive observer, I guess.
Now, in artificial and recondite languages, such translation literally reduces entities to others, and thus eliminates them from view. So, a set theoretic interpretation of number theory does away with numbers in favor of sets, or classes.
Review time. What the fuck am I doing this for? Because what we're talking about is a Polaroid of t equals 0. Right? This is a computational frame. Upon that Polaroid is intensive character information. Meaning it is information that has everything it needs. It is mid-instantiation. It exists. Because this is possible. The reason why we can take this Polaroid is because, as a matter of fact, state and logic really are duality. Even outside of all the woo-woo other shit, the homo, whatever the fuck, iconism, whatever. It still, no matter what, in any programming language, is state and logic. I don't want to go into that. That's not what I'm trying to prove here, but I guess I do need to prove that state is logic, but it's manifest by what we're going to do. State is logic. It's manifest, but state is logic because of click t equals 0, right? That you have just taken a picture of logic. You've taken a picture of the state of logic. And that is a extremely powerful thing. It might be to do with reversibility. I need to think about that, I guess. But I'm quite quite confident about describing it as an observer having to exist outside of, and then observing this t=0 frame. And
twofold ontological relativity that comes out of this. The first is that the reference or ontological import of an object language, right, of a set of sentences we don't understand, of a theory in science that we don't know, is relative to the meta-language it's translated into. The entities in that meta-language will be used to map the language of the object language of the scientific theory. In our case, our meta-language of last resort is our home language, vernacular English. So the fundamental entities of an object language will depend on the meta-language we translate into and the perspective we take into it. If we choose to take an epistemological, phenomenological take on it, a physicalist take on it, or any other sort of take. So the meta-language serves as a sort of conceptual coordinate grid, right, for interpreting that object language.
I'm describing how this can be everything. This can be everything that could possibly happen. Like, literally, it's the entire unfolding as the singularity, for fuck's sake. t=0. Boom. Here's my frame. What's the frame? The frame is the singularity. It's a nice shape, isn't it? It just goes like, just progresses through in-dimensional time. Just integral, path integraling, fucking all this dope information we can use to do some fucking shit. So, we've taken a screenshot of what is about to happen. Like, we can't decide what's going to happen. This is a probabilistic equation. It's a snapshot. The clique, what the photograph is taking a picture of, is the very most bare minimum amount of thermodynamic informational character that is external, that is extrinsic, that is leaking in the extensive. That's the thing. Is the whole. It isn't extensive, but it's still such a good way to describe it. It is the bare minimum probabilistic frame. It is, so there are 100%. There is 100% of behavior in there. Well, okay, that's a fucking good way to describe it right there. This is the future integrated. 100% of the future is here in the singularity that is creating the path integral of the computational probability is what this is. This is 50%, this is 50%. And then, there can be it'd be like 2% there, whatever the fuck. So, this is the thermodynamic head of your singularity, the conscious singularity, not the time singularity. Okay, just real quick, we're going to talk about path integral. What it really is. It is a thermodynamic Polaroid. Path integral. It's their Polaroid. If t=0, the path integral is always. It never isn't. t=0 always is, as it does the path integral. It's a singularity. It passes through whatever dimensional space-time, creating underneath it, integrating the area under the graph of reality, because we've got probabilistic reality, which can be contained in a whole using duality. 0 and 1 can encode any given thing. It is unto itself whole and morphological shape that emerges. Because time t=0 or whatever, but shit is emerging from this, like, at whatever type of rate. Fuck, it's complicated, dude. It's a singularity. It's a fucking singularity. It's hella complicated. It, as it proceeds, creates as a sort of wake a crystallography, because it's not binary. It is binary. It's not literally binary, but why it's binary is because of the duality of state and logic. It is a 0 and or 1. It is a differential. It can be modeled as a differential equation. What does it do? Well, it has the behavior of integrating paths.
Never met before with a language which is unrelated to any other language. And this guy's licking his chops. He sees tenure all over the place if he can map this language. So he goes in. The problem is, how does he break into the language? And he sees a rabbit run by. So he says, and his native friends turn to him and say, Gavaji, Gavaji, Gavaji. And he goes, wow, okay, I got it. Gavaji is rabbit. But is it necessarily? Suppose they have a different ontology than ours. And I've tried to suggest this with those sentences Quine on radical translation. We think of objects as the basic entities, right? Physical stuff, bodies. But maybe they don't. Maybe they are more concerned with smaller bits of animals. So when they say Gavaji, they mean there goes an undetached rabbit part. Right? There's a rabbit ear that hasn't been cut off. There it is. Okay. Suppose there's another possibility. Suppose, in distinction to our own object-oriented language, that their first great scientist was a Heraclitean and told them it's all flux, it's all process, it's all time slices. So when they say Gavaji, they don't mean rabbit. They don't have any rabbits. They say it's rabbiting over there. There's a spatiotemporal rabbit slice. Right? Lo, it rabbiteth, or something of that nature. How do you decide which it is? Well, there is a trick. You have to figure out what he calls the referential apparatus of the language. What we would call logical particles. That's pretty straightforward. Terms like plural endings, singular endings, a, every, and, not.
The path integral is a modified Quine. If I roll, I'll be able to do this better, I bet. The path integral is a modified Quine. A modified Quine is not a normal Quine. A Quine is a computer program that, upon successful instantiation, will then write its own source code, either literally overwriting the source code that instantiated it, or replicating itself. So basically, a normal Quine, a basic Quine, is a replicator. It's an instantiated programmatic replicator. And this is super, super important. This replicator is basically like the meta bit. It's the thing that we need in order to make sense of meta information. You could call it the agent. If you wanted to. I do sometimes.
Spatiotemporal rabbit slices by saying, holding up our rabbit, Gavaji? He says, yep. Put it down underneath the table. So that he knows you're putting it down underneath the table. Pull it back up. Same Gavaji? And if he says, yes, you know it's not spatiotemporal rabbit slices because this is a different spatiotemporal rabbit slice. It occurred 15 seconds later or something like that. And that way you can decide. How do you know you translated the referential apparatus correctly? Right? Suppose you assume that Gavaji means rabbit, and you reread then all of his statements of and, every, some, and whatnot, such that it makes it seem like it's a rabbit. In fact, it's extremely possible to do that. You can get all of the referential apparatus wrong just so that they turn out to be physical objects. And Quine answers, a cagey linguist is a caged linguist. You're not trying to get into the native's head. All you want is when you order a plate of Gavaji, you get it. So any way you translate, it's fine, as long as you can get around in their native language, as long as you can play their language game, as Wittgenstein would put it. What you'll probably do is, no matter whether they think it's time slices or whether they think it's undetached parts, you're going to read it in your ontology. That's the ontological relativity. You're always going to assume they're talking about what you're talking about. And if it becomes impossible to do that, then maybe you'll be forced to move to another posit. But otherwise, you're just going to go for simplicity. Because it's simpler that way. It's easier to calculate. Therefore, the implication is the ontology of a language is also relative not only to the meta-language you translate into, but also to the analytic hypotheses you use to translate that language into, or into that meta-language. So you in fact have double relativity. Thus, what counts in any given object language as a logical as opposed to a factual truth will vary with the meta-language as well as with the analytic hypotheses. Another reason why you cannot have a meaningful distinction between analytic and synthetic propositions. Therefore, the implication is the ontology of a language is also relative not only to the meta-language you translate into, but also to the analytic hypotheses you use to translate that language into, or into that meta-language. So you in fact have double relativity. Thus, what counts in any given object language as a logical as opposed to a factual truth will vary with the meta-language as well as with the analytic hypotheses. Another reason why you cannot have a meaningful distinction between analytic and synthetic propositions. And the result, of course, is that that distinction is completely undermined, as is the distinction between metaphysics and science, right? Because all of a sudden you can't use the analytic-synthetic distinction to say what's meaningful and what's not. If you know how to use the words in a sentence, they're meaningful. And if they prompt a response, they're meaningful. Okay? Because meaning does not refer to something that goes on between our ears. It refers to a move in a language game. If you can prompt a response from someone, that's all there is to it. There's nothing going on in our ears that have to do with language. Language has to do with things outside of us that we use to communicate to one another. Intersubjectivity. That is to say, in a more technical way of looking at it, there is no richer meta-language to translate into. There's no larger conceptual grid that we can translate or map the sentences of our home language onto. So literally, questions about the reference of our home language are meaningless. They're absurd. It's like asking me, well, what is your absolute position in space right now? And as you walk across this podium, what is your absolute velocity? That's an absurd question. There's only relative velocities and relative positions. Similarly with mapping the ontology of our home language. All of our ontologies in every language is relative to another language we map into and the analytic hypotheses. And when you get to your home language, you've gone about as far as you can go. And you just stop there. And you don't stop because, deep down I have an intuition about what it all means. You stop because there's nowhere else to go. And if your home language gets you cheeseburgers when you want it, gets you gavaji when you need it, gets you from Paris to Chartres, you're more than satisfied with it. That's all it is. It's not a mirror of the world. It's a causal connection between you and your environment. That's what your language is. It's a tool. What he calls epistemology naturalized. No longer thinking of the question of knowledge as theoretical, as demanding a foundational answer, but rather it's the empirical study of how a particular species, Homo sapiens, uses its symbolic systems, the sounds it makes, the scribblings it marks onto paper, to erect scientific theories and explanations. Right? And it presumably would be an evolutionary theory as well. Not only how it's done within each child, vis-a-vis behavioral and cognitive psychology, but how the species did it over time. That would obviously include experimental psychology, as well as the sociology of science and knowledge we find in Kuhn, among others. In addition,
source code, and what I say in my source code is that once runtime is true, increment state plus 1 plus equals 1. The most basic. This is the most basic replicator. They're replicators as just naked source code. And I don't understand how people have never gotten to this headspace before, because all that is, all a replicator effing is, the thing that you need in order, the bit for meta information is a replicator. What is a replicator? 3 lines of code that anybody could have written in the past 50 fucking years. That just blows my mind, man. Like, it's literally just been sitting in plain sight. I don't understand how nobody is... the replicator, it's clearly, it's the bit. What do we have? How does digital signal processing work? Well, we've got the Fourier transform, and we've got the decomposition of sinusoidal whatever the fuck, and we can therefore turn any complex number or fucking waveform most things in biology and physics are just a waveform. A lot of times it's actually just an oscillator even, but I'm talking about sine wave of signal processing. Signal processing is the art. You got a squiggle. It's the art of turning that squiggle into numbers. It's a continuous variable, and it is the decomposition, much like the path integral itself. But the decomposition of this is we can take continuous variables from physical quantities. If it can't be a sinusoid, then we can almost fucking certainly make it a complex number, or a matrix of complex numbers. You know what's up. Path integration is a singularity, where t equals 0, like a Polaroid of a thermodynamic situation. An intensive thermodynamic situation that has both a representation and a behavior.
It would have to account for itself. How epistemology naturalized itself came to arise as a phenomenon among this particular species. And presumably would search for causal connections between language, which is not something outside of the world, but is part of the world, is an empirical phenomena subject to scientific empirical analysis. And it would suggest that what we need to find is the causal connection between that part of the world and the other parts of the world, between the linguistic and the non-linguistic, not foundationally, but empirically, provisionally, scientifically.
When does work transpire? When does the thermodynamic character of a process go from being a hollow icon to being irreversible thermodynamic work being expended into the universe? At what point does logic and state, which is the same thing in this situation, this like hyper-dimensional read eval print, or whatever the fuck it figures this shit out for us at runtime, entropy remains low because the system is only evolving internally, incrementing state, not expelling information to a broader environment. So, we could take a Polaroid, but a Polaroid is more than just a Polaroid. And the singularity that is doing the path integration of space-time, or whatever the fuck, runtime. So the quine and the replicator, and the morphology of the singularity, and of information. The replicator, the quine, the modified quine, so if we have some source code, just a Python file, yeah, that file has audit sub state. I'm sorry, some logic. There's not really any state in it, traditionally. Traditionally, you do not, you strive to do all that shit with, what the fuck, I don't even, goddamn, object-oriented programming and all that shit, dude. You know what I'm fucking talking about. That's not what I'm just talking about. We normally we try to take state out of the program explicitly and make just logic as the source code, and that's fine. Ours is logic. I mean, some state is with that logic, and that is going to kind of point towards one of the key assumptions I really think is true. A duality of state and logic. At least when t equals 0. At least when in instantiation, when in the process of being processed. So that state equals 0 is like our seed for homoiconism. It is the start of the singularity of our closed thermodynamic system that is the runtime. And the runtime is what is going to happen when that source code is run. So we can only refer to it in the meta context. Another reason why I call this stuff meta is because we are dealing with ontological processes. It's not the system is instantiated via a naturalized epistemology of thermodynamic closed system, ontological procession. It is an ontological procession. It is something happening. There does something happens. Okay, something happens at runtime, and it's an assumption that's inherent in the source code file. Okay, let me just say, I call that a neural network. I call all source code neural networks. Because it is a syntactical fucking ball of twine. It is a neural network. And every neural network I posit also is a cognitive system. So now the assumption is that there is something for this cognitive system to do at any given situation. Situation only means at runtime. It does not exist except for at runtime. It is a closed thermodynamic system. So the job of a cognitive system, piece of source code, and the assumption is that it has a job to do, and that is there is things, there is time, there is doing things. This is where epistemology comes in. It is the procession of thermodynamic real world states that come forth from our ball of twine. Ball of twine, or any cognitive system, upon processing a frame, t still equals 0, but we know t is going to equal 1 or whatever it's going to equal next. So we inherently have that structure of the abyss in front of us, and at runtime, the first thing the cognitive system does is it orients itself into a cognitive system. So it takes a look around. On one side it sees void, and then it turns around and it sees a cognitive system. So it either it is, and it's its job. That's its first job. That is work to it. It is work for it. It's perceptual. I see void. No, I don't need void. Void is not what I'm looking for. So it turns around. That's not void. I'll go with that. Upon location of its head or its parent, it either orients itself within a cognitive system, or it forks and creates a new cognitive system. So it could go and replicate that cognitive system, rather than just integrating the path of the one that existed already. And cognitive systems pass forward as parameters their source. That's how a replicator works. It is an ontological event that happens at runtime, and at runtime it situates itself so that at the conclusion of runtime it can deposit itself back into a source code file. So we've got a source code file that gets instantiated at runtime. It has some behavior, the first of which is defined. Okay, there's a void, there's nothing there, there's no cognitive, there's a void on all sides. Okay, so there's a void on all sides, t equals 0. Okay, if that, the source code says if that happens, increment that state up at the top. So that state up at the top is no longer 0. That state up at the top is 1. And we're in the middle of a runtime. After we've done that, the work has been accomplished. Everything that we can really get done at this state has been accomplished. So what we're going to be doing is getting ready for the conclusion of the runtime. And at conclusion of the runtime, what is going to happen is a holographic reflection of the runtime and its state. And the way we do that is by having a method on our cognitive system to encode its own source code, meaning using the abstract syntax tree or just literally using assembly language and some making bytecode. Like, I mean, yeah. Cognitive system passes forward parameters and state using abstract syntax tree at runtime. So we are getting ready to pass forward. We are at runtime. We know what our source code was. We know what our source code is. And what we do is we decide what our source code is going to be. We have now the AST representation of the logic that is the source code. And now what we do is we plug our values from the actual Python runtime. We go through the objects that we've used, and we plug any of those values into the values. Okay, we're plugging into AST any objects from our runtime, if they exist, in the AST as logic. So if there's a logical container for the state in that AST, we're going to plop that in there. Literally. Like, so if we've got a runtime value, it's an object that says Apple. We're going to do that for the whole source code document. We now have an AST with fucking numbers in it, okay? And what we do now is we fully turn that into binary. We create bytecode. And the act of doing that is like taking a Polaroid of a time extracted t equals 0 computational cognitive frame, and it has within that AST, everything that is needed to be turned into binary, so that next time someone runs that binary, however that happens, it's going to be done with a script or whatever. Next time someone runs that binary, it is going to reinstantiate a runtime, self-validate its logic, and then self-validate its state. Then it is going to proceed with the runtime. And in our last runtime, we changed the state from 0 to 1. So in this runtime, we see that there's a 1 in the state. And elsewhere in our now binary code, it says if state equals 1, then don't write a bytecode. Don't use AST. Just keep yourself as a Python file. Thus, we have created a morphological meta computational moment. Leave it at that, motherfuckers. Alright, let's make our Klein. Let's do it. Let's make our Klein. So let's start out by saying we have a class state. I don't need to do all that. I don't need it in it. So, what we do in a modified Klein is we make this literally get updated in the source code file. When we open it up again, it's like someone just did what I just did. It's like someone literally changed it, which, yes, is indeed contrary to what you're told to do. But we don't listen to instructions over here. Okay, so we've got a state class. So we have a class. So what we're going to say is when we're parsing our AST of this file equals, do I need to do string? Let me try string. String, I might have to do string. Yes, okay, that's fine. That's fine. So now what we're going to do is parse this. Yes, we're going to open it. Yep. Yes. For line. Yeah, that's fine. Let's see that. Let's see how that works. Okay, perfect. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say if line dot starts with, yeah, we're going to do class. We're not going to print line. We're going to say print pass. Else print f. Exactly. Like that. Okay. Alright. Let's try that. So did we skip the class? Okay, well that's interesting. So pass, where is it getting this pass from? This file. So really it's got to be, or if it's indented. How does an indent token indent? Oh, that's better. Let's do type. What type is that? That should be a class. Unclosed file. 4-line in parts this. Okay, so we can't do that. 4-line. Aleph. So this is going to be if it's got class, it's going to skip. We want it to skip class because this is the very top thing in the file, and we want it to skip class, and we want it to access state, and we want it to look at state, and if it has depending on what state is, we want it to do some particular thing. So right here we've got 4-line Well, we're opening up the file as parse this. Now for line in parse this, we're saying if state is in it, so we're just doing is in, so this is dumb string matching right here. So if state is in the line, let me just debug this. We're in debug mode. Okay, so if state is in the line, so if state is in the line within parse this, we want to modify the attribute of state called state so that it is an integer. Not quite Quine-like, but it's very graceful, if nothing else. I mean, it'll very, very nicely delete itself. Wait. Okay, I'm fucking. We're going to goddamn Claude. Fucking Claude. Set me straight. So how did he do it? So he gets source, and he has a get source object. Then he makes a tree. He didn't walks the tree. Alright, smart ass. Oh, dude, he got it fucking perfectly right, didn't he, man? No, dude, it's not gonna say 1. Dude, it says 1! Come on, he nailed it. I'm a moron. And now it says 2, and I'm a fucking moron. Dude, I've sat here for hours. They just nailed it. Python just nailed it. Just clever boy. Okay. Did it do everything right? Yep, so it implemented, or it incremented. Alright, now we know. If it tells us to buy the stock, do you know who's telling you to buy the stock? It's not me. Who is? Is it an alternate universe? Let's see. Does it tell us to buy the stock? Buy the stock. It says, you saw it here, motherfucker. Who the hell said to buy the stock? Okay? That is what modified quines, and replicators are. We will increment our state and notice that we don't say anything. Now, we'll do it again. Notice we have incremented our state in the literal source code, and in the literal source code, the logic that depends on that literal state has now triggered, and it's told us to buy the stock.